So we would take a few minutes and provide you guys a little bit of detail about what is Nephio, why we started it as a community, and where we are going with that. Then there's some additional detail about the progress that we already made, and other things that are planned towards the release one and beyond. So you will see that the whole sausage making today. The second part is like a lot of discussion going to happen with respect to the development that is happening with respect to the community. And John and Stephen and team, the whole team would actually present to you a demo, and there is a workshop involved. And I think they will guide you through that workshop. And then there's a further discussion about each SIG group presenting their progress. And we would also talk about the plans towards the release one. And the third item is primarily for TSE member, and I think some of you are able to make it, and not all TSE members were able to physically present here. But there are people in the Zoom call as well, so we would have a discussion on some of the progress that we have to make with respect to the TSE. Okay, so that's the goal of the summit, and I think we have up to 5:30 p.m. today for all these discussions and presentation. With that, I will hand over to Sana. So Sana will take like a few minutes and just to introduce you to Nephio. And sorry for people that already know about Nephio, this may be a repetition, but we want to make sure that everybody newly came here to know more about the Nephio. So with that, Sana.
Thank you so much, Kandan, and thank you so much, everybody, for being here. I think the ones who are trying to learn about Nephio, I will go about describing what that is and what it means in the telco context. So first of all, we'll try to shed some light on our transformation that is happening for the last 5+ years in moving from PNFs to the virtualization state called VNFs, and now we are at a stage where we have CNFs. Telcos have seen the massive amount of transformation in their industry. We were extremely closed. All of our stack was extremely coupled, and now we are at a stage where there's a lot of disaggregation that has happened. But the cloud native realization is still a process of evolution. It's happening gradually, and there are many different dimensions that we can touch. So the first bullet point, which says journey from VNFs to CNFs, is the most interesting one in this ecosystem. So telco network functions were actually designed to satisfy very complex standards and RFCs developed over many, many years. And if you look at that code, the way the VNF is designed, it has years of experience from the vendor's R&Ds gone into it, and the refactoring and remodernization of that code is not simple. You cannot redesign that application to become cloud native overnight. That's why they're wrapped into something called CNFs. They're packaged as CNFs, but they're still very monolithic in nature. So as an industry, when telcos wrapped those CNFs and tried to bring them on Kubernetes, we were not able to leverage all the benefits of Kubernetes the way a cloud-native world should see. And there is a lot of active work happening in the industry along different standard bodies like CNCF. There is a TAG user group. There is a SIG group specifically working on these CNFs. In the Nephio website itself, if you go, myself and Kandan has published something around the 12 factors of CNFs, which is the enabling ecosystem that will actually support the vision of Nephio, precursor to Nephio, and how those cloud-native functions can actually support Kubernetes vision and the Nephio's vision. That is also explained in that. So Kubernetes are very powerful, and this is one of the most successful open source projects ever after probably Linux, and has a wide range of adoption across all the telcos. But when you put this in the context of telcos, we are not using Kubernetes with its true powers today. We are putting Kubernetes as a layer that barely manages infrastructure, but the capabilities and the control of Kubernetes goes far beyond that. And that's where the project Nephio is talking about, and I will try to describe that in more detail. Give me one second. Kandan, can I see those slides here as well? I'll continue like that, but if I can pull it up here.
Sure. You're not advancing the virtual.
Today, we are in dire need of improving our automation protocols, because when we did not use Kubernetes for the automation, we relied on external elements called VNF managers and the NFEOs, and standards evolved to standardize those interfaces, and the evolution of those standards was relatively slow compared to the growth of the cloud-native world and how the public cloud and private cloud providers were growing in building their capabilities and features in the APIs in that space. So a lot of times when we were working on deploying our CNFs on the cloud, we were barely wrapping it up in a package which is not interacting with about 80% of the cloud environment APIs and services. Those workloads or CNFs were extremely huge, and they're still very huge. And the way we are putting them on cloud, we are not even leveraging a true business case of the cloud. We are not using the cloud APIs. We are not using the cloud resiliency models. We are not deploying thin, small, and growing with an ability to fail fast and recover faster. We are very much old school in terms of how we are deploying our CNFs and how we are lifecycle managing that. And a little bit about how this is actually impacting our OpEx and CapEx. When you look at a large number of tools coming from a large number of VNF vendors, which is giving you the capabilities of lifecycle management and operations in day two, we have a large number of tools in the form of VNF managers, and most of them are not fully compliant to the HC APIs. You see a lot of heterogeneity in that state on how you're modeling the application packages and how you're deploying that, and abstracting that and simplifying that paradigm is very complex. We are mostly treating our workloads as pets, and we are hopefully moving to a vision in which we can treat our workloads as cattle. So that is a lot of OpEx and CapEx reduction that is expected to happen with Nephio's adoption. And currently, the way we are deploying our infrastructure, and we are deploying our applications, and we are deploying the configurations of our applications is all out of sync activities. So the infrastructure teams are probably using a large number of tools at Terraform, Ansible, and those teams are out of sync, applying the configurations to your Kubernetes, which are specific to telco requirements, like your SRIOV, DPDK, CPU pinning, huge pages, all of that is coming from a different team in a different funnel. And then your network function deployment teams who are actually managing your VNF managers and your VNFMs are taking the Helm charts from the vendors and they're deploying it completely out of band, out of sync exercise. And there's probably a third team, the service owners, who are actually deploying the configurations to your network functions. So in the cloud world, there has to be a synchronization in this activity, and there has to be a mechanism for us to actually take us to a much better day to ops management. And we'll talk about Nephio in this summit, and we'll talk about how that state can be improved to a very cloud-native paradigm. So I think I little bit touched on the complexities that we are facing in the telcos workloads today, and that is all about the customizations that are happening in the Multus, the SRIOV, the DPDK. And we did touch a lot about this, that if we could use the Kubernetes as is. For example, if we had a simple IT applications, we could just use Kubernetes as is, and that would have been sufficient for us to do the full lifecycle management. But unfortunately, it didn't happen in the context of telcos, so we are not using Kubernetes for the lifecycle management, and that's what Nephio is going to bring to the community. I want to discuss a little bit more on the Helm, how we are using that, and why it came to be adopted in the existing Kubernetes community when the telcos started to deploy their workloads as CNFs. To me, it seems like Helm was faster and easier at that stage to start the adoption and start working on something quick, and they started working on Helm. And a lot of CNFs that we're receiving from telco vendors today are actually using Helm for the deployments. Helm has certain properties. Helm is easier to write, to fire something quickly, but the complexities of Helm become, we realize that when we're actually growing your application in complexity, and when you're deploying your Helm charts to a large number of different environments, there's a very complex, huge values file. Once you take it from one side to the other, you're changing the environments, and the work that you do on your values file is massive. So it is a realization that is happening to all those telcos who are actually participating in Nephio, that Helm is very prescriptive in nature, and we have always been talking about being more declarative, being more intent, being more abstract. So all those abstractions started to happen in the standards layer, and we are working on those layers at the TM forum, we are working on those layers in the HC, but that is not coming all the way down to where we interact with the cloud. For the very last drop where we're interacting with the cloud, we're still using Helm, and it's very prescriptive. So that can be replaced with operators, and which will be more declarative, and there'll be more intent-based mechanisms in that, which can can actually satisfy the larger term goal of how we are becoming model-driven and how the concepts of Tosca can be better realized, and we will describe that a little bit more detail in the next slide. So how does Kubernetes extend, and how does the concept of Nephio gets applied to the world of telco network functions? Everything that we talked about, all the complexities and customizations which are required for the telco network functions, the SRIOV, the DPDK, the CNI plugins, can actually be expressed as custom resources. And Kubernetes is a general purpose control plane, and the visibility of that control plane can be extended beyond what it can natively see and express and lifecycle manage. So when you define those custom resources and you describe their intended state in the custom resource definitions, that is the intended state that you want your Kubernetes layer to basically maintain. You write operators on the top, and those operators are actually driving an infinite loop, which is constantly reconciling your state from an actual state to the desired state. And that loop is infinite. And then you apply that concept to 3 different pools. Your infrastructure has their own CRDs and operators. Your network function deployment has their own CRDs and operators. The configuration of the network function has their own CRDs and operators, which means that with the power of operators, you can actually simplify your day 2 management, your upgrades, your rollouts, your day 2 plus configurations can all be managed and handled in one layer. That is the layer of Kubernetes. Now, this actually relieves a lot of things in our network. We are not depending on 10 different types of vendors for deploying and packaging and wrapping those CNFs to us and giving to us. We can actually do this all in-house with our own capabilities, because the knowledge of Kubernetes is widespread. It's the common denominator across all the public and private clouds, which is actually helping us achieve a lot of interoperability and skill set sharing across the industry. So the vision of Nephio, cloud native automation along with the cloud infrastructure will be a fundamental building block to achieve the 5G vision. We already talked about throughout the themes of this conference that the vision of 5G is all about service innovation, being very software-centric, the transformation that is happening across the organizations to innovate faster, to deliver faster, to maintain the feature velocity. All of that is coming with the cloud native adoption. And the cloud providers around the world are actually helping us accelerate on that vision. And Nephio is an automation model that can actually help us get to that state faster. So the optimizations happening through Nephio can actually be put into 3 different buckets. The very first one is a declarative approach. I slightly touched on it, but I can describe that in a little bit more detail. Declarative means that you are abstracting the complexity away from your effort. Declarative programming is when you are not worried about the control flow of the execution. You are writing something in a higher level, and this has been a concept of a lot of existing automation in the industry as well, that the ability of writing NSDs in the standards and how we write Toscas, we're all driving the philosophy of being very declarative. Intent-based. It's another very powerful mechanism that we have to use in our automation systems, because we are not running in a fire and forget mode. We need to build an automation which is actually driven by our analytics, which is constantly helping us reconcile to a desired state, which is actually managing our day 2. And eventually this model can take us to a data-driven model where we can apply the AI machine learning to optimize a lot of our operational bandwidth that is being used by humans today. That is where intent-based automation comes into picture. And simplified cloud native automation is basically all what I describe, is that using one tool, one Kubernetes layer, to do all the automation across all these different layers can actually dramatically simplify your lower level of how you interact with cloud and can enable us to consume cloud much better than how we are consuming it today. We discussed how the Nephio is going to create the custom resources, how it is going to create the custom resource definitions, how it's going to create the operators across all these 3 different verticals, and how this is actually helping us extend the control plane of Kubernetes beyond what it does today. This unified approach allows us to use the CI/CD principles and common tooling across all the layers. And today's workshop is focused all around You're not able to see the text? I think will the slides, yeah, Kandan, can we make the slides available? We can probably make it available on the schedule. People can quickly download it, and if there is a situation where they want to see the slides on their laptops. We can do that. Right. Okay, perfect. So the community has to come together in doing a lot of work. We have done some work, and a lot of work is still in progress. We are coming with some design principles, how to write operators, how to write CRDs, how to extend the base CRDs and operators and extend that to a lot of vendors, how to ensure that vendors are providing us the operators which are pluggable into the project Nephio. There is a lot of work that has to happen at the community level. And John and Stephen and all these other folks who are actually here with us today will actually drive us through a lot of those efforts. I'm going to invite Kandan to walk us through a user journey and give us a little bit more update on the progress of the community. Thanks.
Thank you, Sana. We will upload the slides and make it available for everyone. And I just want to talk a little bit about the end-to-end user journey that we are looking from the Nephio perspective. I'm pretty sure that this will evolve over a period of time, but here is a view of it. So basically a package author and author the package that are needed to get deployed, both the infrastructure and the network function. And then you have a network designers who goes and actually make sure the configuration for that particular intent has been really set properly, whatever that applies to their network. And then there is a set of deployers goes and deploy that in the infrastructure, any interdependency between the infrastructure and also the network functions on top of that. So this whole process is what Nephio is trying to build on, is that it provides you the holistic deployment model and in a cloud native way for the whole infrastructure and the network function together. So that's the introduction section that is already completed, and I think I'm going to focus more into where we are with respect to community, and I think especially this is for both the newcomers into this community, also the community members. So we started this community in April, and there were 25 plus founding members, that including Google, and we provided a seed code from Google. And this is a Linux Foundation community. Of course, we are gathered here in the Linux Foundation conference. And the importance is that to foster the benefits of the Kubernetes. So that was one of the key aims, is like how do you use Kubernetes for automation, not only hosting the container, but also for the automation perspective. So that was one of the key goal of this community, is that maximize the usage of Kubernetes. And where are we with today with respect to this community? There is a 70 plus members, companies participating in this particular community as of now. And I think the community is growing very fast. And I would say that I've been in open source for a very long time in different open source community. Definitely this is a very fast growing community. And our TSCs and SIG groups are fully established, and a lot of you are part of the SIG group, and we also have the chair and co-chair has been elected for those SIG groups. And there's about 100 plus developers, like actively getting engaged, and this crowd itself is a good example of, people getting engaged in this community. And especially the next demo and the workshop that team is going to show, that you can see that community is already started working in a very collaborative way. And the goal for this community right now is target the release 1 in early next year. So that is a goal that we are working towards it. But again, as a community, we all should come together and make that happen. So here is a little bit of color that what I talked on the previous slide, and what we have accomplished and what we have in front of our eyes in terms of getting the release 1 out. So we got the Nephio community launched, and we have the community procedures and process all have been established. And I also talked about the SIG groups, and everything has been completely formed, and it's completely in operation right now. And we also had the Developer Summit 1, which was in the Google office, and sometime that was around June. And now we have this Developer Summit 2, and I think we are moving towards the release 1 that would be in 2023. So primarily, I think the time frame that we are looking at is that as a community, I think we should march towards getting that done in April-May time frame, and we would be planning additional workshop, additional sessions, and additional showcase of our community in the MWC as well. And with that said, and we also, from a Google perspective, we are also learning, going to actually put like additional code and source code into the community. So with that, this is the goal of the release 1, and this has been discussed multiple times in the community and the different SIG groups and TSC. So I just want to give a big picture of what we are planning here. The scope and goal for release 1 is that it's a little bit smaller compared to the vision that we have, and we really want to take a baby step in achieving it. We don't want to chew up like too much, and then it doesn't actually make sense for the community. So the intention here is that we want to have this building blocks, that primarily the control plane and the CRDs and operators and the frameworks around the CRDs and operators. And there's going to be a further detail shared in the workshop as well. So we want to get those things done, and the main success criteria for release 1 is to really get the Nephio framework understood by the community, and contribution coming from all the community members, and contribution that goes into the industry as a first version, so that people can get a better feel about the Nephio. And again, as I pointed out, we wanted to mainly focus on the fundamental building blocks, and that fundamental building blocks is what primarily going to be in the release 1 that to be released. This picture may be familiar to you. This picture is something that the Google team presented in the last developer summit, and we promised a set of components that we're going to open source it, and we already open sourced a bunch of components, and we are in the process of open sourcing additional components, which I will show you in the next slide. And I'll skip this slide and go to this slide. So primarily Porsche and config sync and a set of CRDs, and again, we worked with all of you in getting this workshop ready, and we really appreciate all the community members coming together to make this workshop happen. And the second is we have a set of other items that are planned, which are listed in this particular thing, like NF deploy CRD and a selective infrastructure CRDs, as well as operator for NF deploy is something we're going to contribute. And there's a set of items that the community has to progress in making the release 1 happen, and that's what it is listed out here. And again, the SIG group is SIG 1, 2, and 3. They would drive that to make that happen, and TSC to guide the process around it to make sure that we can deliver the release 1. And we also want to look beyond R1, and this is an important aspect that we want community members to think about it. As a community today, we should discuss more on some of these items. And I think the goal that we had is like a multi-cloud, multi-network function deployment, and also multiple use cases. Because right now we are very focused on 1 or 2 use cases around mobility, and we would like to extend that use case into different scenarios and stuff like that. So I'm talking about this is beyond the release 1. And we also want to prepare the Nephio for large-scale deployment, management of large-scale clusters, either it's a private cloud or a public cloud. So that's something that as a community that we have to come and work together to make that happen. And the other thing is the CRDs and operators. We have to get more work on the CRD and operators in terms of the schemas, in terms of how does the community version of CRDs and operators would be maintained, and how does the vendors can actually write their own CRD and operators, and then some sort of a compliance and certification program. In which we can sort of certify people, especially when they have a Nephio supported version, and we want to establish that process in the community so that we can issue a badge for the version that are maintained by different companies. The other thing is the control plane, and I think this control plane components is what primarily it has to evolve. That including having additional SDKs, additional operators of operators that basically gives a pluggable infrastructure with the multiple CRDs and operators. And of course, we need to have some UI built with primarily design studio sort of a look where a drag and drop can be done in assembling the infrastructure and the network function so that it can make the ease life for telecoms and the users. And we also want to have discussions around the APIs that would interface with the master service orchestration layer or inventory system or BSS system. So we want to make sure that that is something we should plan for it. So with that said, And the existing process, I think, we have it very fine-tuned for release 1, and we would really like to have that, further evolve. And we would also like to have a board being formed, because right now there is no board, and Google funded for the first year. And the membership and the participation from the community members were all free right now, as you all know. And from a 2023 April timeframe, we would like to have this is more of a community project. And this is something, we would like to have everybody participate and figure out what is that funding is needed to make this community going forward. And of course, Google will pitch in as well. And the other part I think I want to point out is that, there are areas around, again, as I said, the community is very optimized in getting the initial fundamental building blocks done. But we should also think about the other areas that I showed on the previous slide. There's many things need to be done. And I'm not saying release 1 or release 2. I mean, over a period of time, many things need to be done. And that many things can happen with the new projects being formed under the SIG and the focus on a specific items. With that, I propose this proposal, and we will discuss this further in the afternoon, the discussions around how do we form a board, and the discussions around how do we accept new projects under the SIG group 1 and 2 and 3, so that we can allow innovation to happen from people that are contributing different set of codes. So that could be including, things that we saw in the roadmap, or it could be something also different. So the one of the approach, again, this is a proposal. This is not an approved plan. This is where we want the TSC and the community to start think about it, is that basically we create a mechanism and by adding additional processes into the community that allows us to incubate new projects and bring in new projects and embed into the overall picture. So that's something, we would like to discuss more today in the evening. So with that said, so Nephio is really bringing a lot of benefits, and there's a lot of interest, as I said, 70+ companies, and you can see the logos outside that are posted in the poster, and much interest. There's a lot of interest here. So it benefits CSPs, the cloud service provider like us, and it benefits, the telecoms. Of course, this is built for telecoms as a user, and it benefits them, and it also benefits enough vendors, because as a community, this is a benefit to pretty much everybody. It's not to a one set of group of people. So with that said, I also want to point out a couple of logistics items for today. There is a survey that is being conducted by Analysis Mason, and they are analysts. And if you're interested to participate in the survey is just for telecom people, not for for the vendors or other people. So if you are a telecom, if you're interested to participate in this particular survey, and the survey is about cloud nativeness and survey about questions about Nephio. And if you're interested to participate, this is a link for it. The link is also available in the Nephio wiki. So if you go to the events page and under the events page, the link is available there. So you feel free to take that particular survey if you're interested. The results will be shown actually in the future conference that when we have it, right? So Analyst Mason will publish the conference. One more logistic item before I hand it over to John and team is today evening we just want to have a social, and we have not picked a place yet. But if you are interested to join, we want to know how many people would join so that we can book. It's a pay yourself, but it's a matter of getting socially connect each other, and outside of the workshop that we can talk and socialize ourselves. So with that, how many people are interested to join the social? Again, you have to pay yourself, but it's good to connect between. So that's almost 20 people, I believe, maybe more. So we will let you guys know, we will come up with a couple of suggestions. I think LF team is looking at a couple of suggestions around, and we will let you know. One more logistics item, we only slotted a little bit of time for lunch, and the lunch is not served by the conference, so we had to go grab lunch outside. So when you grab lunch outside, don't have a large meal, and then don't if you don't come back. So we are trying to figure out a couple of places for the suggestion. If you don't know already the place, we will suggest a couple of places where we can grab a quick lunch and come back and continue the session. So with that, I will hand over to John. And again, we are already running late, but I think John and team will take over and actually do the workshop with you guys. Thank you.